So, first of all, I'd like to say good evening. My name is Georgina
Really?
Johnson. I'm the director here at the Douglas Hyde Gallery. And this is Gabrielle Curie on the other image. Um, we're really delighted to present this artist talk in the context of our current exhibition by Gabrielle, entitled Spending Static to Save Gas. Working across sculpture, collage, installation, and other media, Gabrielle is fascinated by the logic of everyday objects and resources. Often using repurposed materials, natural, industrial, and otherwise, he links questions of form with how we value, circulate, and assign function. Playing with the principles of minimalism and the history of consumption, he considers the information of materials and information materially. For those of you who don't know him, Gabriel was raised and educated in Mexico City. He participated in Gabriel Orozco's workshop in the late 1980s, along with Abraham Cruz Villegas and Damon Ortega, and completed his MFA at Goldsmiths in London in the 1990s, and has been based in Brussels on and off over the last 17 years. His work has been shown widely, with the recent large-scale solo exhibition at Fields in Brussels, and other solo exhibitions included Sadie Coles in London, the Common Guild in Glasgow, Aspen Art Museum, Parc Saint-Léger, and the South London Gallery. His exhibition at the Douglas Hyde Gallery, which is his first solo exhibition in Ireland, runs until Saturday the 12th of September, alongside The Artist's Eye with Kirsten Perroth, Water, and you need to book your visit on the gallery website. So just to say, there's only a number of days left to catch the show in person. Spending Static to Save Gas was developed in collaboration with Oakville Galleries in Canada. And we'd also like to thank the residency program at the Irish Museum of Modern Art and Esther Shipper Gallery for their support. And special thanks to the Arts Council and Trinity College Dublin for their ongoing support, and to our supporters, friends, and the wonderful team here at the Douglas Hyde Gallery, many of whom are behind the scenes at a social distance, especially Fernando Sanchez, who's upstairs at the moment. This conversation takes place under significantly altered circumstances. We often have artists talk at the very end of an exhibition as a way to kind of allow for those moments of talking about reflection and kind of looking back on the exhibition and the exhibition making process. And it's also an opportunity for the artist to return to Dublin. This time, Gabrielle is speaking to us from his studio in Brussels, and you, the audience, are viewing from your own spaces. So hello and welcome, everybody. To begin, I want to explore the spaces that both myself and Gabrielle are in. So Gabrielle, you're in your studio, which is on the 3rd or the 4th floor of a building in Brussels. I couldn't remember which level it was at precisely, and overlooks the streets. From my memory of visits there, you're surrounded by long tables, which we can see in the background, which have objects on them, picked up in many places across the world, and gathered for consideration, categorization, and combination. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about the studio, where you're located at the moment.
Yes, it is the top floor of a building of a former postal school and a postal service school, and I like it because it has a like an institutional feel to it. It's like working in a very, very large office, and I was lucky enough to have this really great view, so that really allows me to concentrate very well. Even if I spend only an hour in a day, I get a lot done. I'm not someone who spends hours on end in the studio without leaving. It's very important for me that my studio is also in a part of town which is busy. There are shops and schools and people of all ages right outside the door, and my house is very near. So it's important for me to be able to feel that I can reconnect at any point. So yeah, I'm lucky. I like it here, and yeah, not all of my practice, of course, is studio based, but I guess, like a lot of artists, I do have the discipline of coming as often as I can and sitting down and trying to give form to thought. And sometimes I just sit and I do nothing, but but still the studio is some sort of locus that I return to. And yes, as you mentioned, I have my long tables with all my props, and yeah, I'm surrounded by them, and it's laying them out is a way for me to just have them on site and make all these connections. Sometimes two ideas connect very quickly, and sometimes it takes years. I also follow, like I guess a lot of artists, a sequence of notebooks where I write down all my ideas. And I think in a similar way, as I am checking through them, sometimes I connect one thing I noted down, or one sketch I made yesterday, with one that I did 2 years ago, and then thanks to this archive, let's say, which is in a sense parallel, similar to the physical archive of the objects, I have the opportunity of making connections and references between impressions, ideas, or simply form.
Great. I'm gonna talk a little bit about where we are at the moment, and for those who haven't maybe seen the exhibition, there's a chance to look through the upper levels of the gallery. That image will appear momentarily. Okay, we'll see if we can get some images of the upper level. So I'm here at the Douglas Hyde Gallery, which many of you have probably visited, but if you haven't, is this building that opened in 1978, but is a brutalist building. So there's a heavy emphasis on kind of concrete. It was designed by the architect Paul Karluk. And one of the unique aspects of the gallery is that it has this incredibly cavernous space. And I think it's something that, Gabrielle, when you came to Dublin and also in the development of this project, we were kind of looking at using space and thinking about the space which developed from the Oakville project. So here you can see a site-specific installation that recasts the cavernous architecture of the gallery, creating a static field to reduce the building's energy use during the run of the exhibition. The large-scale installation drastically transforms the space, slicing it into two, the dizzying heights of the gallery. So you can see this kind of slicing in the lower, between the levels. I'm on the lower level. The work is made up of a makeshift drop ceiling, littered in a seemingly accidental accumulation with residues of human interactions and life, coins, cigarette butts, and moths. Thousands of these punctuation marks are gathered and composed in a grid-like format within rectangular wooden frames across the space. The ambitious work is accompanied by a smoke drawing which traverses the gallery walls, achieved by the burning of 27 sheets of paper printed with the figures relating to the logistics of this structural intervention, and an itemized estimation of the cut and the energy bill it should bring about. Alongside both, and on view behind me, you are showing a selection of new and recently produced thermally insulated sculptural works. You can see 2 levels. There we go. So I suppose I'm just bringing it into the conversation part. Of kind of one of the things that I wanted to start the conversation with is this quote, which I returned to, which I read at one point that you said, and this idea that art is always philosophy for you. One of the ways in which art can be radical, it's about transforming and reinventing what is around us. And in your work, you gather, categorize, and combine materials. And that's something that's very visible, I think, in the studio, but also throughout your body of work in terms of looking at things that we encounter maybe that could be quite familiar, but become unfamiliar in that kind of combination. So you create, recreate, and re-signify that which surrounds us, conjuring meaning in such a unique way. And I'm very interested in your vocabulary of both the kind of hard and soft materials and resources, but in particular, your attraction to the language of sculpture. And when you were talking to the team here, you talked about this idea that you are a sculptor and this exhibition is of sculpture. And I suppose I just was interested in what attracts you to that medium in particular, what's kind of achieved through sculpture and how you turned to that medium.
Well, I can go back to the very beginning of what you were saying. I think of my practice as a life philosophy with a lowercase p. But sure enough, it is a way, it is a protocol, it is a modus that I employ to inquire about the world. And my inquiry is done through form and through objects. I am, of course, interested in asking some of the questions that a lot of people do, or philosophers do, about the way we got here and how we communicate and how we assign value, and issues about language and structures of exchange and power, etc. But I do it through the language of sculpture. I do it through form. I do it through objects. And ultimately, what I want is to understand myself in the material world, and how the material world is organized. There are all these invisible structures, let's say, that weave together all these things and all these forms and all these materials that I work with. And it's really through the practice of sculpture that I aspire to achieve this. It is, of course, a constant inquiry, and I'm not really out there to propose any fantastical scenario. The things and situations that I work with are always, they always come to me in first-hand experience. I don't really develop my practice in a library or on Wikipedia and then go on to illustrate it. I try for the opposites, to for my work to come from first-hand experience. And if I'm lucky enough to convey this directness that I encounter when I am in this material world, then I would, of course, feel very glad.
And I think then it's interesting, this idea of the material world. I think because there's many, like in previous works where you used kind of like hotel shampoo bottles that often we discard and don't necessarily kind of bring with us anywhere else, or the kind of marble countertops that you found in the streets of Brussels. But I suppose in that way that you consider the information of materials and then information materially. And you've said that your work is never completely material nor solely information, which kind of echoes what you were talking about previously. Only when the two are in agreement can I consider a work finished. And we live through this process of kind of expenditure and consumption, and we could say that we drown in information and materials. And that's very much kind of a present moment, these questions of kind of sustainability and how we deal with objects. How can you talk a bit further on how you select materials and how you approach information? Like, there is that process, I think you talked about it before, kind of in terms of decanting, like the things that come into your studio are already decanted, and there's already kind of some form of a relationship, but how you think about these two things together.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested in ordering principles, and ordering principles, of course, are directly connected to basic notions of reasoning, of rationality, of counting or organizing from small to large, from left to right. Sometimes they are as basic as that, but of course I point at objects that exist, and sometimes consumer articles that exist and that already are coded with many layers of information that have to do with distribution and exchange and etc. And I don't ignore these things. I cannot exactly say how it is that I go about by selecting all these things, but somewhat I just continue polishing my field of interest. And I'm not really an accumulator. I'm not someone who has this ambition of I don't know, like my stock growing in a, let's say, hormonal way, but I'm trying to polish my field of interest, as I said, and yes, very often I think of objects as tokens of exchange, and this exchange can be quite clearly economic, or maybe a little more critically tokens of communication. But I would say that I am normally interested in trying to see what's specific about objects that have a degree of familiarity, that I know would have that way of connecting with the audience, and I could actually use them, as I said, as tokens of communication. For me, art is my practice is it's an act of communication. So with these objects and with these forms and with these situations, I want to allude to all this.
Oh, there was just a break there, Gabrielle. We just missed the last 2 minutes, or the last minute, I think, of what you were saying in terms of.
I saw a little sign saying my connection was unstable. I'm sorry about that. I don't know where I was cut, but maybe the last minute I spoke was a little bit going on about the nature or the interest in the materials that I'm drawn to.
Yeah, I think that idea of communication is so kind of central to the work. I mean, I do remember being at the Fields exhibition and the staircase and seeing the thank you clouds.
Yes.
Like, those kind of plastic throwaway bags that say this expression is thank you, but then they're being kind of powered by the fan within the space, and they're almost something that you overlook, but then by being put into this other kind of relationship, you really see them in this very different way, and has a kind of great power to that. Kind of maybe going back to the project here, you've described this project, Spending Static to Save Gas, as one idea exercised in 3 different ways. So the spatial intervention within the space and the lowering of the temperature, the smoke drawing, which you can see behind me, which used the 27 pages of the kind of facts and figures of the reduction of energy consumption and the energy cost as part of the project that actually spanned the wall here, this wall. This wall here, and then the thermally insulated works which are behind it. How did the idea of spending static to save gas, or in many ways it's kind of futility to this exercise, how did this idea emerge?
Yeah, I think the word futility is of course very important here. And maybe I should start with this very simple fact that once Oakville Galleries in Canada and the Douglas Hyde in Dublin, teamed up to offer me this project, I was very excited, of course, not just because of the history of these places and the individuals who run it, but also because of the fact that they're both almost disproportionately high, and they are both in latitude which basically sees pretty harsh winters, and I knew that there would be a considerable consumption of energy, basically to keep the spaces warm. So my reflection started a little bit on that projection of what happens here in a space of this height when it comes to the cost that it takes to run it, and what would happen if I cut it in half. That's already a gesture that I thought would have a certain strength, and then of course that started throwing all the estimations and the facts and figures, and then that's where the whole, let's say, circular motion started. And then in the end, I ended up, as you said, making the same, expressing the same thing in 3 different ways. One is with the spatial intervention, which is by all means a sculptural gesture, and then that was of course also the, let's say, the physical way in which there would be this projection of like cutting down on the energy bill, because of course all the heat would be kept on the lower level where the staff and the audience are, and then that estimation can also be expressed with charts and facts and figures. That was another sculpture that somewhat started coming to mind. And then there was let's say the sculptural representation. So I thought of creating a very simple ecosystem in which this one idea would be expressed in 3 different ways, and the audience would be also enveloped, would be immersed in it, and I think the people who had been before to the Douglas Hyde and also to Oakville Galleries found it, of course, very striking to walk in and to see this very drastic cutting of the space with this makeshift drop ceiling that completely transforms the sense of scale and proportion and the light and etc.
And then I suppose that idea of maybe working within the gallery space, like there's also this whole idea of kind of flow, of thinking about the flow of air within the space, but then the thermally insulated sculptural works that are here, this idea of a kind of an ecosystem that exists, the idea that artworks travel from one place to another place, and we don't really think about that journey or the space that they occupy in these in-between spaces. This idea of like what's visible and what's not visible, or what's kind of hidden in many ways. I suppose that idea of focusing on the gallery space as a whole and as an ecosystem, how that emerged. And I know that some of that developed with talking to Matthew Hyland, who is the director at Oakville Galleries, but this idea of thinking about a kind of broader system in which the gallery occupies a space.
Sure. I mean, as I said earlier, it was a very welcome coincidence that both spaces are very high. And then there are, of course, there are all these, given facts, like we know that the galleries have a series of running costs, and we know that, the weather gets cold and all these things. I thought I would really like to make them work into this ecosystem and help me develop the sculpture. Another thing that I wanted to mention as well, when you said the thermally insulated sculptures, these are in fact the sculptural props that traveled from its first iteration, let's say, in Canada. And in my work, I constantly shift or bounce back and forth, let's say, from a more abstract approach to an idea to a more metaphorical or a more literal. And I don't make a very sharp distinction between both, but a chart, for instance, as I exhibited in Oakville Galleries, it was printed on a large sheet of paper, so it had a physicality. It was used as a backdrop for a series of objects, which were, of course, freestanding. They were not flat, let's say, two-dimensional printed. They were actually standing. So there was that bouncing between one dimension and the other, no? The dimension of facts and figures and the physical dimension of actual objects. So I thought these objects, I would like them again to become sculptural props for the next iteration. I didn't want to repeat the same thing, but I made them travel from one place to the other in these customized boxes that are, as you said, thermally insulated. The object that we see behind you, these elongated objects, I call them error bars. And this is an idea that I learned from reading about statistics. I'm a big amateur science reader, and I love the idea of this. There exists such an idea as the error bars, which are basically these devices, let's say, that allow for certain error to be calculated in any given statistic and still arrive at an accurate estimation. And I thought, you know, what would error bars look like in my estimation? I am trying, of course, to make a statistical projection. What would my error bars be? So I fabricated them, and then they traveled, and they are right behind you.
I think because I was thinking about your most recent publication as well, where you've just produced about the doorstops that you've been collecting over.
Yes.
And in some ways, that idea of an object, I think you talked about, it kind of fits between a hard place and a floor. It's kind of like between the floor and the floor, and that there's a kind of accuracy in some ways of how they operate in terms of like the precise gradient, up to these kind of hand carved, almost like incidental objects, and how I suppose that idea of then with the error bars of kind of thinking about precision, but then maybe an inability to be entirely precise, and how we think about that idea of kind of precision within the way that we work, with the things that we do. What attracted you to the doorstops in particular?
Well,
because you've been collecting them.
There's this, the fact that they wedge in there. They are there to really make up for a difference, let's say. So thinking of them in terms of precision, I think it's quite right of you. They are there to make up for a difference, for this very little space, and then once they're in there, then there's something that's locked in place. I think there are, again, formal ways of expressing any given idea. No, we know that the world of mathematics can be expressed with numbers, but also with shapes, and we can think of it as a system of locking shapes. In that sense, very often I think of my sculpture in those terms, and it can be not something that I'm reasoning all the time, but simply by trial and error. No, and then when you find that thing that wedges and keeps something in place, or suddenly holds something in balance, that could be expressed also with a formula. You know, but it's also clear, and there's the same evidence, let's say, if it's just expressed with a form.
And it kind of goes back to that idea maybe of the agreement, that kind of hard and soft materials, or thinking about the marble tops or the shampoo bottles, or there was a work in your Veils show that had plastic straws along with kind of rocks, essentially.
Yes.
It's kind of, I suppose, like interception, or something that kind of allows for other things to happen in relation to that, and how we renegotiate our relationship with the material, as well as the function, as well as how we kind of read that information as well with your work.
Sure. And I think in a lot of my works, there is edging, or like nose to nose or shoulder to shoulder, that kind of subtle. Am I back?
Yeah,
yes, because suddenly I was, that subtle sculptural gesture that I see around in my everyday life a lot. You know, if I'm riding on the tram and I see the way that a person, you know, wedged the newspaper between the seat and the wall of the tram, or all of these things, they matter, of course, and they are sculpture, and sometimes they just have a certain eloquence, and I look at it and I record it, and I try to recreate that strength and that evidence that I saw.
And I think there is, this is something you were talking about, that our relationship with the world, that in some ways what you experience in the gallery space, and when you step outside, you almost see the world in a slightly different way, with the very connection between the world and the gallery space, or an artwork inside and outside of the gallery space. There was something else I was interested in. I was looking at this idea kind of time. There was a much earlier work that you did of the chewing gum tree from 1999.
Yeah.
Which captures these layers of kind of haphazard placements of colored chewing gum on a tree beside a bus stop in Mexico City. And this idea of the time spent chewing the gum, the time waiting for a bus to come, is gathered, and these remnants of physical presence become an informal monument to the passing of time, both personal, kind of individual, the collective, and the natural in the form of the tree, because the tree is obviously growing and then all of a sudden is stunted in some ways. And previous works have presented, as I mentioned, the kind of shampoo bottles denoting this time away from home, kind of thing, and even the way that your tapestry works and the receipt, this kind of idea of displacement or indifferent spaces. And here within the work, Spending Static to Save Gas, there's an accumulation of cigarette butts and cent coins and dead moths, which you've talked about in terms of markers of exhaustion and kind of punctuation marks. And I just was interested in how you consider time within your work.
Well, I think you gave a few examples in which I do in a very eloquent way, and sure enough, time and timing are for me basic notions of sculpture, just like volume and mass and space and texture and color. Some pieces are slow, some pieces are fast, some pieces evolve over time, and that evolution over time is, of course, one of its important constituents. The project at the Douglas Hyde, of course, develops over time, and the way that some of the pieces were made, I think, is patent of a certain investment of speed or slowness. And there is a development, there's a beginning and a development, and then there's let's say a conclusion towards the end when we see whether this system that I devised to keep the heat down is actually going to meet the numbers that I projected. All of this for me is sculpture. It's not a narrative that is parallel or just attached to it. It is sculpture, and in some works it is, let's say, more legible, like in that image of the these little testimonials to waiting, or when I work with the little stubs that you get while you're waiting at the post office. There are, let's say, some documents like the receipts that are clear to everyone, that they imply waiting, or they imply a transaction, or they imply a journey. And again, time for me is really inscribed in sculpture in a way that, just like any of the other basic notions, as I said.
That's very interesting. And I think then we might open it up for questions in a few minutes. I'm just look and see if there are questions appearing. Not at the moment. Maybe over the next few minutes we might have more questions in relation to, I suppose, like more broadly your practice, but also thinking of particular work here. I think there's also that idea of kind of travel within the work, or displacement, again, kind of thinking about how things move through the space. But one of the I was thinking about was this idea of, I mean, there was kind of particularities of making this work with you in many ways, in terms of the kind of drop ceiling and questions of like codes of like fire safety codes, and then the smoke drawing, and this idea of kind of, I suppose, the transition between those spaces of thinking about the kind of dropped ceiling and really altering the physicality of the space or the experience of the space. And then there was also this kind of performance element that maybe was not visible. It was the remnants of the performance that were there with the smoke drawing, as that was tracing across the entirety of the wall, which you can only see part of it here. How you thought about the development of that particular, the smoke drawing piece, because I think it was something that emerged maybe later in the development of the project.
Yes. The smoke drawing happened because, on the one hand, I really wanted to work on the walls of the Douglas Hyde because they are just beautiful. They're so grand, and I thought I want something that really encompasses this grandeur. And I thought the facts and figures blown up to that size are probably going to have a certain strength. And if these facts and figures are cut in half by the dropped ceiling, making it impossible to connect, the top and the bottom, that may work. And I kept on thinking, and then I made all the estimations and worked a lot, with you and the people in charge of the maintenance and etc. at Trinity College. And when I had all the charts, I just had the hunch that I wanted to burn them, to turn them into energy, very, very quick to consume, but to turn them into heat, and to make a drawing with that, a very quick drawing. So this is something that the audience didn't see, apart from maybe little documentation pictures that have been published with the exhibition. But a team of us was just making sure that I didn't set the gallery on fire, and I proceeded to burn all of the printed charts and make a drawing on the space that I really wanted it to extend all the way to the top. So we used the scaffolding and etc. And then after that came the drop ceiling to cut it in half. And so, yeah, when you come into the Douglas Hyde, for those who haven't been to the Douglas Hyde, one of the really wonderful things about going there for the first time is one of these very few places in which you come from the top and you look down into the space and you dominate it with one gaze. And so what you see now when you come into my project is only half of the volume, because the rest is your view is stopped by this canopy that is translucent. You can just about tell what's underneath. So I thought, in that sense, there would be that urge probably of the spectator to want to go down and to maybe do this going up and down, and then activating the journey in order to connect what's above and below, or disconnect. No, what maybe create this desire to be able to see the whole smoke drawing in its entirety, but then the impossibility because you have this canopy that's cutting right through the middle.
And I think as well, it may be for people, if they haven't seen the exhibition yet, the drop ceiling slices through the main staircase. So actually people are coming through a spiral staircase, are coming down in a kind of interior spiral staircase that is not normally used by the public to come into the gallery. So there was that kind of absolute, I think it can also be quite a confusing space to come into, because you're not too sure exactly how to maneuver, because the work spans across all of the different spaces.
Yes.
The idea of the kind of above and below, and thinking about how we determine or how we read that information from below and from above.
True. And of course, now it's amazing how we managed to not to make direct reference to the situation we are going through. The exhibition was actually closed for like 4 or 5 months, and in the beginning, of course, our whole intention of opening in the month of what was it, February?
The 30th of January.
30th of January. We scheduled the exhibition so that it would open in the cold months, yeah. And then the whole system that we devised about the heat being fed into the space and then kept underneath. We closed certain valves so that the heat was only fed underneath the drop ceiling, etc. That, of course, started to work. And we had a temperature measured above and below, and we started to see how it was functioning. And then 3 or 4 weeks into the exhibition, the whole college was closed and the exhibition was closed, and yeah, I just imagined like someone turned the key and it stayed like that, like in a time capsule, and then it opens again, in a time where the consumption of energy has changed, because of course it opened at the end of the summer, where the temperature is completely different, and this was something that fate had prepared, and I'm of course trying to see what I make of it.
Yeah. And that, I think, the idea of the accumulation that exists within the ceiling, the way that people have encountered the moths, but we also have like a drop ceiling that's part of the architecture here, and thinking about that passage of time, so the other things that are accumulating in the gallery space over that period of time, that it's
Sure.
about an enclosed system that becomes even more kind of enclosed in many ways.
Yes, as you said in the beginning, the top of the drop ceiling is seemingly accidentally littered, and that's a little bit the intention, that it looks accidental, but not. So of course, when you think of a place that was closed to the public for this amount of time, these little witnesses of that quiet time become probably more pertinent. I don't know. Yeah.
We did have that slightly scary moment after, because we weren't allowed to get access to the building, and kind of to check that everything was where it was supposed to be, but everything was fine, which was good. I think there's just one or two questions coming in there. This is from the first person. Some of the work seems combined, put together, made by yourself. Some other seems fabricated by others upon your instructions or indications. Do you relate differently between the two?
That's a very good question, and is one that I have to reformulate every time I work in collaboration with with fabricators that are in facilities that provide industrial finishes, or with people that finish things by hand. And I would like all of my work to have the same, to feel the same, to feel that it was made by me, thought by me, and it's not really the trace of my hand that should define it. So I think work has to be, it sounds a little simple, almost dumb to say, but I think the work has to be really precise, very, very well made, so that it feels and looks effortless. And sometimes the way to achieve that is to actually go, I can't do it here in the studio, then I have to go to a facility that works with stainless steel and does things incredibly perfect in that sense. And that's, let's say, the only way. Then I go for that. And for instance, the structure that holds the plastic at the Douglas Hyde, we made it in collaboration with these guys that were incredibly precise. They showed me these isometric 3D renderings that I never in fact saw, and they were so precise. And everything was there in their sketch. And then when the moment came to assemble everything, it was like magic. Like every little piece seemed to fit in place. And of course, when you go, it looks effortless, but you can tell that it was not effortless. But in a sense, that's what I look for when I work here, even with modest or fragile means, and or if I work with fabricators who are capable, as I said, of giving a very, very proficient industrial finish, is to come to this precision. The feeling that there's only one way to execute a work, and I would hopefully get to that.
Okay. Yeah. One more question, sorry. So I'm looking at slightly two different screens there. It says from Pablo Rodriguez, who says he would like to know if you have if you really have this relationship with public space, or maybe your interest in public space, and how you consider this present within the exhibition, or how you think about the idea of public space?
Well, I think a lot in terms of public space. Objects in public space or objects in my studio, they are exposed to very different incidents, and it is very interesting sometimes to displace objects from one, from the coziness of this or in my head and put them in public. We also know that exhibitions can happen in places which have a varying degree of being public. It's not the same to exhibit in a biennial that has like tens of thousands of visitors that in a commercial gallery where the audience is much smaller and in a sense it's more captive. But I reflect always about what it means, what public space means in terms of circulation, in terms of let's say also the architecture of communication. Like there are places in which you stand and you look around and there's a lot of information flying at you. That is of course also part of the nature of public space. A lot of my work I do on the run when I'm in train stations or in airports or in public loos. Suddenly I see the way that things are disposed, the ergonomy of a public restroom is of course different to that of someone's restroom in the house, because it just has to cater for a let's say for the same function but for a different flow of people. So that in fact comes to define my sculptural practice a lot. This reflecting on public space.
Yeah, because I'm thinking, I suppose, particularly your use of stainless steel and that idea of kind of paper towel dispenser, but then also like you've worked a lot with that idea of kind of like a polling station as well.
Yes.
These elements of blankets or those things that we don't necessarily consider.
Sure, you can think of the objects and their function, but also just strictly in terms of the physical properties of materials. If you think why stainless steel is used so much in public, it's not aesthetic. It's of course because it's very easy to wipe. It's super foreign to the human body. So of course it endures a very heavy use. And I love how that contrasts with paper, which is of course completely the opposite. But then you see them in the same contraption. In a public loo, you see the stainless steel dispenser, which is there to be used for hours and hours and hours and hours and by thousands of people, and it's actually providing paper, which is directly in contact with it dries your hands and it's used just once, and so it's that materiality that very often speaks to me. It's not just the fact that it is public and all these things that we can understand and explain, but also the simple physical properties of the materials that are employed.
Mm-hmm. Maybe another question here from I don't know who NOF4 is asked about this idea that there a group of artists, some of whom I know that who would make, or maybe there's a kind of shared language in terms of Jason Dodge, Michael E. Smith, Nicholas Ross, Sina Bayer, perhaps also Darren Bader. And I suppose maybe that question of whether or not you see that to be kind of like a concern, or whether or not you see there's a kind of positive relationship, or how you would, I suppose, consider practices, but maybe there's just kind of shared material interests.
Yes, I'm not sure whether I can see that so much as a question. Yeah. I see that this person associated my my models with these artists that are mentioned, some of whom I know personally, and I have of course an affinity which goes beyond just our choice of materials or gestures. I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's so much for me to answer that. it's really in the work. And it should come as no surprise that people in different places that are exposed to similar things and travel to similar places and have probably some recurring patterns come up with work that has all these echoes.
And in terms of maybe we may one more question. I think, I mean, it's been an interesting number of years for you in particular, because obviously there's been the Beals kind of sorted, resorted, which gathered a number of works made over an extensive period, as well as then these two projects at Oakville Galleries and here at the Douglas Hyde Gallery, which had a very, I mean, which in many ways was kind of a new body of work. And I suppose
yes,
there has been some time. It's kind of often when an artist is making particularly new work for an exhibition and the exhibition opens, there's not necessarily the same kind of moment of digestion in terms of that work, thinking about it. And obviously it's unfortunate that you're not here in the space to be able to experience it again in person. I suppose how you reflect on this body of work, and then maybe what's next? What's the next project that you're working on?
Well, one thing that I enjoyed very much about the project at the Douglas Hyde is precisely what you say, that it was a new, you know, I wasn't entirely, it's different to make an exhibition like the this survey exhibition I had at Wheels here in Brussels, where most of the work, let's say 2/3 of the work, was already existing, and even the work that was produced in the last year leading up to the exhibition, in a sense, was already organized. Let's say a project like the one at the Douglas Hyde is an opportunity for me to leap into something that I'm not so very sure of, and I need that because I would like for my practice to have these different avenues and these different speeds or these different opportunities of looking forward into something that's more of a hunch, let's say, but also to try to look at something that I just did and then bring it to the present again, to throw some light again, or to associate things that I did 10 years ago with others that I'm making now. It's not so very often that we have the opportunity as artists to really live with our work. Very often you make an exhibition and the morning after it opens, you're traveling somewhere else. And sometimes it is in retrospect that you start understanding and assimilating certain things. So whenever I get the opportunity to revisit some things that I've done recently, I've been doing it more and more, because I don't feel the urge to be coming up all the time with new ideas, and I just want to be as thorough as possible with whatever ideas I am developing. And sometimes this involves revisiting, as I say, and revisiting quite literally, like, you know, bringing something and you know, seeing it again, maybe in a different light, in a different context. The exhibition at Douglas Hyde and Oakville Galleries, there were these two chapters, which I also enjoyed very much, because it was very simple. It was like, you know, first chapter, second chapter, what is the development, the possible development? What is the connection? Is there any chance that it could be repeated? What would it mean if I did the same thing identically in one place or the other? All these things are, of course, questions that I very much welcomed.
Great. Let's see. Oh yeah, there's a good question from Pablo Rodriguez. Sorry, and then maybe this will be the last question. Who just asks, which I think is something that's so resonant, is what place does the sense of humor occupy for you in your practice? Or how do you think about, I suppose, like maybe humor, or how you think about humor within your work?
Rather than answering that, I would put myself as a spectator, because it would be complicated for me to speak about where sense of humor comes within my practice, that I would not start hearing my own voice in a weird way. But when as a spectator, I really appreciated when there is something that I learn from seeing an exhibition, that I learn about myself, and it is through humor, through the humor in the artist. I think it's a really helpful and enlightening tool, pointing at certain aspects of reality with sense of humor, as a certain acceptance of surprise and grace. I think can be a very powerful tool, a very powerful resource. Of course, I take my work very seriously, but that doesn't mean that I'm serious. Yeah. I also take sense of humor seriously. It's part of my rigor. You know, what I do really matters to me. But that doesn't mean that I cannot, you know, have fun and laugh. And I really enjoy going to an exhibition and seeing like a really enlightening, intelligent exhibition that makes me smile. I really like that.
Good. It's a great answer, Gabrielle. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Georgina.
For joining us this evening. It's been such a privilege to work with you. I'm very sorry to say goodbye to this exhibition in a few weeks' time. For those of you who haven't seen it yet, you can book on our website. Unfortunately, every visit has to be booked through just with contact tracing and the current situation. But thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, Gabrielle, and hopefully we'll see you in person some stage very soon.
Yes, thank you.